Welcome to the Newcomer Network at You Multicultural channel. My name is Jocelyn Gilbert, and today I have Jaime Chinchilla. Jaime is a diversity, equity, and diversity advisor. Hi, Jaime.
Hi, Jocelyn. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you.
So, Jaime, tell me a little bit about yourself.
As you said before, my job title, that's not who I am, but that's part of who I am. It's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisor. I work at a place called Johnston Group, but I'm also involved with several organizations in the community. And like Winnipeg Chamber of Commerce or the CODE initiative, which it's an acronym for Commitment to Opportunity, Diversity, and Inclusion in Winnipeg. And the other side of who I am is I'm a musician, and that's actually how I ended up in Canada. I came here to pursue my master's in music from Brandon University here in Manitoba. And so I still do both. I am involved in a number of projects. Namely, I managed 4 or 5 different bands in town, and I also, as I said before, do my diversity, equity, and inclusion job, which I think is what you want to focus on today.
Yeah, and something very interesting about Jaime is that I met him 5 years ago when I arrived to Canada because he was one of our instructors. So you are an instructor at a very known university here in the province.
I teach at University of Manitoba and the University of Winnipeg. For University of Manitoba, I teach at the Extended Education Program. So I taught there a few courses before the pandemic, and that's when I met you. And then for the University of Winnipeg, I teach at their Professional and Applied Continuing Education Program, which is called PACE. And so I managed to find time to do that, and I guess I don't like to have a lot of free time.
You're a busy person. That's good. You're very involved with the community, and you can give from what you have. So what has been your experience? Because you have been working with many newcomers, and you see how they have been involved in the community.
There is many ways in which newcomers are involved in the community. I guess the country, it's in need of immigrants because of structural reasons. For once, the economy needs more and more people to produce, so we're able to sustain, the fiscal system and the pension systems. But on the other hand, we also bring a lot of contributions outside of the economical aspect, social, culturally speaking. And so in a country like Canada that is very multicultural, similarly to a lot of developed countries in the world, newcomers contribute to almost anything, right? You see them on any kind of job, on any kind of position, and more, also helping build and continuing to build society in general. So you can see them in roles like in government, community leadership, entrepreneurship, and so on and so forth. So I think there is, this idea that newcomers, and then the other thing is newcomers is a tag that changes depending on the context. Sometimes a newcomer is considered to be a person who arrived 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 8 years ago, or 17 years ago. So today I'm sitting here, talking as a newcomer, but I've been in Canada for 17 years.
Wow, 17 years. Yeah. I have been here for 5 years, and I still consider myself as a newcomer. But
depending on what you consider to be a newcomer, then that's the kind of contribution that you can get. And there's also generations of immigrants, right, that grow up here and also contribute without losing all of their cultural ties or cultural background.
So can you share a little bit more about your role as an advisor?
In the last few years, especially after a couple of events that happened that affected the whole world, but North America, and I'm talking about the death of George Floyd and the Every Child Matters movement here in Canada, with the sad discovery of common graves, so on and so forth. Diversity, equity, and inclusion people whether they're called a specialist or an advisor or consultant, became more and more needed for a lot of organizations. So the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion is about making sure that workplaces in this case, organizations are more inclusive, more diverse, and more equitable, meaning historically there has been barriers and challenges that society has, but by extension, any organization in that society that derive from historical inequities. So in Canada, for example, we have the colonial history that's been taking place for hundreds of years. I think immigration to Canada is part of the same story. When Europeans decided to go and change the world for good or for bad, mostly for bad, they messed up things, and we ended up having some people with some disadvantages here, our indigenous peoples, and also in the places they were anywhere else outside of Canada, whether it's Africa or the Caribbean or Latin America or other parts of Europe, Asia. They also created economical, social situations that ended up making it really difficult for people to make a living down there. And I'm talking throughout years and years, decades and decades, even centuries. So, the fact that we are here from Latin America, wouldn't be the case if you could stay in the tropics, beautiful Dominican Republic or beautiful Costa Rica, if things were good there. But we have to remember, right, we were conquered and colonized by these same European countries, whether it is England or the Netherlands or France or Spain, and it's part of the same story, right? It's a global happening that has been going for years and years. And when you take that into consideration, coming to any organization that it's formed or was formed in that order, because the colonial order is over, but the structures and the laws and, even the systems that they created are still in place at so many levels. One of them, for example, the way in which we structure the economy in colonial countries affects the way in which organizations are structured in terms of hierarchies or in terms of sometimes even opportunities. And so my job is to go into workplaces and analyze those systems, those structures, those barriers, and those challenges, and create programs and create tools to hopefully someday eradicate them, but take down some of those barriers or create supports for people who are being challenged by those same structures.
Wow, I didn't even have an idea of what you were doing. For newcomers, sometimes we have been challenged because we are coming from other countries that are not that much multicultural. So how would you explain to our audience what a diversity workplace is?
Yes, well, culture, and I'm following up with culture because you mentioned the word multicultural. Culture is just one aspect of what diversity is. It has different dimensions, and of course, one of them is cultural, meaning the information and the education that you received that gave you some values and some understanding of your surroundings and the people that interact with you. But we are a lot more than that. So today in diversity, equity, and inclusion, we talk about a concept called intersectionality. Just imagine, different intersections or one intersection with different roads crossing one with another. One of them being gender, another one being culture, another one being, a religion, another being language, gender expression, so on and so forth. So we are made up of all of these different layers. And I think what happens in some of our countries is that the concept is still not used as it is used in developed countries, in the sense that, we don't analyze reality, or sometimes, in this case, in the workplaces, based on those concepts. But diversity is definitely there because we have women and we have men. We have people with different ages. We have people that face different religions, different languages. In Latin America, if you go back to the colonial times again, they brought people from Africa. So a place like Costa Rica, where I come from, a whole province is it's mainly black population, and they speak Creole English. Another one is, mainly from indigenous inheritance, so they, you can differentiate them. Whereas people in the capital are it's more populated, but by generations that came after the first Europeans came to town. So I think if you go to all places in Latin America, you're going to find that diversity, so that we don't necessarily pay attention to it yet, right?
And for how long have you been working in similar roles?
It's fairly new, so for example, there is no career to how to be a diversity, equity, inclusion specialist or advisor. We come from different areas such as HR, sometimes management, sometimes sociology, sometimes education. And so I started working many years ago in a field we call settlement. Settlement in Canada is the idea of helping people settle. So people who work in the settlement sector, we help people register for their health services for school. We help people with housing. We help people with different community services. And I did that for a space of about 4 or 5 years. Then I moved to Winnipeg to do something called the Intercultural Diversity and Intercultural Training Program with Manitoba Start. I was the coordinator of that for about 3 years. And then when the pandemic hit, they closed that position, and I found myself, with a lot of free time. I did my own thing for a while, and then I ended up working with Johnston Group because they found me on LinkedIn. Surprisingly, I think it only happens once, but it did happen, and they offered me to do this for them. So here I am.
And how do you think this program has benefit the community, the newcomer community?
Which one? The
program, like what you're doing now?
Yeah, what I'm doing with Johnston Group is not focused on the communities. I work with what we call equity deserving groups, and newcomers are one of them, of course. But we have indigenous peoples, we have people with disabilities, women, neurodiverse people. We have people with mental health issues or conditions, and I work with all of those equity deserving groups to make sure that the workplace is welcoming, it's inclusive, it's diverse, it reflects our community. And so I guess part of it is that we get benefit to be more inclusive. And so newcomers in this case, as well as any of the other equity deserving groups, if they come to a workplace where this work has been done or is being done, they're going to find a more friendlier and more welcoming workplace. One where they can develop their career path. Because the problem with being newcomers is that you're welcomed into a system and into a country where, it's easy to go part of the way, but once you hit your ceiling, it's really difficult. And in companies like the one I work with and most of the private sector in Canada, what that means is that newcomers will be able to make it to entry and mid-level positions. But after that, it's really, really difficult to grow. And so part of what I do is make sure that that path has less challenges, so it's more likely that people like us from those minorities or equity-deserving groups will be able to grow and develop themselves without that ceiling, right?
So we have more opportunities.
I guess in short, this is how you can say that, yeah.
In a very short time, we have more benefits.
Yeah.
Than before. How do you see newcomers' voice in the policy making? Do you feel that our voices are heard to create new policies?
Well, I'm going to answer that in two different ways because I work with the private sector right now. And so private companies have different ways of doing things than, for example, government or crown corporations. And then we can talk about, in general, about society and the laws and policies that affect all of us in general. But I think the work I'm doing in the private sector, that's exactly it. It's about giving these equity-deserving groups and again, namely, indigenous peoples, newcomers, women, people with disabilities, mental or physical, people from the 2S LGBTQIA plus community, a voice, but not necessarily a voice, fair playing ground when it comes to opportunities and the elimination of challenges. So one example of that is that workplaces write what we call a diversity, equity, and inclusion policy. Sometimes this policy is more effective than other times, but it is about leveling the ground for people. So if you're going into an interview, for example, with a company, who you are will not affect the result of the interview. So you train people with that policy, or that policy gives you the ability to train people, HR professionals and managers. So when they're hiring or writing job descriptions, they're less biased in the way they do their tasks. For example, when you write a job description, traditionally in Canada, but all over the world, those job descriptions and job ads were more leaning towards male because of the language they were using, so male candidates. And today we have software that analyzes the job ads to tell you the gender bias. And so today we can do that with software, but you can apply that to all the processes in a company and make sure that they're not biased, whether it is gender, racial bias, or ethnic, language, etc. For example, in Canada, some places could be biased against French Canadian people because there is not enough French in the workplace, or there is not enough representation of Francophone culture in a place where it's supposed to be the two official languages. And then we have a history, for example, of French Manitobans. And so it is through policy that you can build those tools. And sometimes policy, which is internal law for workplaces, will dictate some of those procedures. Now, when it comes to public policy, it's a much more complex issue. We have to remember that immigration is not a program that the government has. I mean, they do plan and execute immigration as part of a demographics program. It's more about making sure that we have the number of people that we have, regardless of where they're coming from. So what the government is worried and what the Canadian economy is worried about is not about who is coming from which country. I mean, they worry about who is coming, but the main preoccupation of these programs is making sure that we're going to have enough people to sustain the economy in the future. And so as such, we have a lot of power in the sense that we come here to contribute to the economy, and therefore we have a lot of rights because we're contributing to that economy equally. And sometimes that is not reflected in the way the rest of the people see immigrants or newcomers, or even the way that we're treated at so many levels. So I guess that we get to have our voice and our share of power that we can do through, for example, elections or participating in public life, but it has a high price. Yeah. And that high price, as newcomer, you probably know, adaptation and, learning how to live in a cold weather, doing jobs that are not related to your qualifications. All of those things are steps that we have to take and that represent a high price to be able to have that voice and that participation you're talking about.
And even understanding of the Canadian culture. Because sometimes it's a challenge.
Yeah.
Especially when you are coming as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
Because for our children, it's easier. Jaime, which policy would you like it to be implemented that you see that still we're struggling with? Is there something you say, oh, they should implement a policy about this? Or
the last group of friends that I met from different countries that are coming through the different programs the government has, is exactly that. We're seeing as an economic need, and sometimes the human parts of who we are as a group and as individuals are forgotten. And I'm talking about, you can see people who come through a program called Working Holiday program, which is they allow people to come here and find a job in the first 6 months, and if you're successful in finding a job, you can apply for permanent residency. At the end of the program, which is 1 year, they can get rid of people who have not found a job, which is okay. If you're a good candidate to be in this place, a wonderful society and country that we call Canada, should be able to find yourself a job. If that's the criteria, that's fine. But for what I'm finding is, at least for this group of people that I found lately, is that sometimes the government is very slow in processing things. And so you end up having people who are left in the middle, who have filled all the criteria, they did all the paperwork, and now they're in a limbo because they don't know if they're going to be sent back or if they can end up applying for the permanent residency. And so they can make it really difficult. My own case, I came here as a student in 2006, and I finished my degree. And then when I was about to apply to permanent residence, I had been here for 4 years, completed all the requirements. A change in government, change of legislation meant that I had to wait 2 more years. And the problem with this is that, those levels that we go through from temporary work permit or student permit, permanent residency, citizenship, they give you rights and status. Whether it is the right to access the healthcare system, whether it's the right to register your kids for education, whether it is the right to vote or even go out in and out of the country because you have to constantly be applying for visas and permits, makes it really, really difficult. And I think what I like to see is that they do better in terms of lining up all those things so they don't make people wait for those long times. I ended up having my PR after 7 years.
Wow.
Because of that change. So they can change the rules on you every time they want.
But this is 17 years ago. I think that things have been getting better.
Well, yes and no. That's what I'm talking about. So these people are being attracted with this program that's supposed to be 1 year, and at the end of the year, they don't know if they can stay. So I have a couple of friends right now who are left having to pay an immigration consultant because they were told, you get a job, you at the 6-month mark you can apply. They did apply, but the government is so slow in replying that the permit is gonna be over before they have an answer, and they're being told they have to return to their home country and wait. But then what they're forgetting is that some of these people are leaving everything behind. They're selling their belongings. They're saying goodbye to a lot of things. Sometimes even cutting hard on their career development to come here. And if you do that, then I think there's always room for improvement. That's what I in the immigration system. We are told that we have one of the best systems in Manitoba, and then also if you take the whole world, that we have a good system in Canada. And I would agree for the most part, but there's always room for improvement.
Yeah, there's always areas of improvement. And on what you say, also, so those people who have to go back to their countries because they're in a limbo, we could say that, those people are leaving their jobs. So their employers are needing them, but they have to go back because they don't have the status.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, yeah, that's true. So still there's lots to do. I know diversity is very a broad topic, but how do you see employers are making newcomers feel valued and recognized now in the workplace?
That's again a question that has many sides depending on who the employer is. I work in the private sector, and private sector is usually worried about making money. With the idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is in part social justice and making sure that people don't have challenges and barriers, the other side of it is it is proven through research that if you are an inclusive and equitable workplace, you will also perform better, meaning you will make more money, whether that is in sales or services. The reason behind that is that it has to do with engagement, right, and belonging. Everyone can be engaged and belong to an organization without having to be part of a minority. But it usually takes longer and it's more difficult for someone from an equity-deserving group to feel like they belong, to feel like they, have a chance at that workplace. And so the more it takes for you as a newcomer, for example, to feel that you're part of an organization, the longer it's going to take to also produce at your best. So when you're happy, when you feel like you belong, when you feel like this place understands you and there is a place for you and your culture and who you are, all of the aspects of who you are, then you will be in a better place to perform better and give your best. The opposite is when you're not included and you feel like the workplace rejects some parts of who you are, whether that's your gender expression, your religion, your language, then it's going to take down your mood, your motivation, and your performance. And if that happens, regardless of what you are in the organization, your performance will end up affecting the organization's performance as a whole. And so, it's not only about doing the right thing, it's not only about social justice, but it is also about good business. And so in the private sector, that makes a lot of sense. Other sectors, which, for example, the government is also about performance like any organization, but they also have a different way of doing things. For example, the government has to answer to the Employment Equity Act, which is a piece of legislation. And so the crown corporations and government organizations, they need to answer annually to those numbers and have demographic goals, something that not necessarily happens at the private sector. Some companies would have it, for example, the company I work with, because they're conscious about the need and they understand the correlation between performance and productivity and having those numbers up. But for the government or for non-for-profit organizations, it's not just about performance and productivity. Sometimes it's also about creating the space so they can improve the service, so they can end up with fulfilling their mission, which is improving the community in one or several aspects. And so it depends where you work or what organization you're in. But I guess it's always about performance and making sure that you're also bringing some social justice to your organization.
Yeah, and I was thinking about that because this is a benefit, this is an advantage for us as newcomers. But what about performance? Do you think this, because sometimes they want to be fair in having everybody, like a diverse workplace, but sometimes we struggle to find someone to do something specific, but you have the person, but you want to have a balance with a diverse staff, I might say. Do you think it's there a challenge with performance, or okay, I am going to hire you because you are a female or you are a newcomer?
No, that's never the case. Historically, there was a moment in history, and I'm going to specifically talk about, the affirmation legislation in the States, where, at some point in history during the 20th century, they made companies and organizations hire, with equity, meaning a number of Black people, for example. So in the States, we have this mainly Black versus white historically, of course. And we also have other groups like indigenous groups, etc. But this Affirmation Act made organizations and government and businesses to hire according to the goals, and it made it mandatory for a number of years. And it created that problem that we call tokenism. With the word token meaning, being hired because of who you are, regardless of your skills. So in Canada, we treat things a little different. And it's ultimately about, especially in the private sector, it's ultimately about having the skills. Now, having said that, newcomers and a lot of the other equity-deserving groups have many, if not all of the skills that organizations need. But the issue is that because of who they are, they're not seen as having the skills, or having the skills is seen as a secondary thing. You know what I mean? So coming from a country like Dominican Republic or Mexico or Costa Rica or Ukraine, your accent will play a role in the perception that the employer will have on who you are.
Do you think still happens?
Of course, because it's a matter of bias, and bias is an individual thing that you have to develop with each particular person, and then it's also an organizational thing. But it happens a lot less since we have these programs and these positions across the sector. And so to answer the question, hiring newcomers, they're hiring a lot of talent. But the problem is that there are barriers and there is context that needs to change in order for them to make use of all of that talent to the maximum. Meaning, if you give people who are coming, for example, as a chemical engineer from France or from, Slovenia or from Africa, a doctor from India, it's going to take time for them to adapt. But if you offer supports and programs to speed up that process, you're going to be able to use that talent and those skills that you were thinking of in the first place faster. So the government is bringing people and they put a lot of conditions on people. Some of them are about those skills. They're trying to attract the skilled workers in so many areas that we need here in Canada. So a good balance then needs to be having the right programs so that they can make use of those skills faster and not end up on substitute jobs like driving maybe, or maybe cleaning, or a lot of the jobs that we do as newcomers first when we first arrive here. Sometimes are called stepping stone jobs, transitional jobs.
Entry level.
Right, and but a reality is that the skills and the talent that we're bringing matches or surpasses the needs of the Canadian businesses.
And something I like to say is not about my accent, it's about my skills. Because sometimes your accent or the way you speak a second language does not interfere with the job, with what you have to do, because you need other skills.
Mm-hmm.
You have them even more. We mentioned that you have been here for 17 years. But let's see from the last 10 years, how do you see newcomers in leadership positions in the last 10 years? Have you noticed a change in general with your friends, with people around you?
Well, if we're talking about Manitoba or Canada, right? Because we're catching up definitely in Manitoba, right? We're catching up to places who historically have had a lot more immigration, like the big cities, Toronto, Vancouver, also economical centers like Alberta, where they attract a lot of immigrants because of the industry they have. So in a sense, it might feel faster than it is. In another sense, it might feel like we're catching up and we're slowly getting there behind everybody else. But I think, I can't think of a time where Canada didn't have newcomers. So if you go back decades and centuries, people who are leading today are, the result of waves and waves of newcomers from Europe. Sometimes, there are newcomers.
Not those newcomers.
Okay, now you're making a difference because, and this is an interesting and also sometimes a sensitive topic, because we have newcomers and then we have newcomers, right? Let's think about the last two wars that we're aware of. The war Russia and Ukraine, and the other one with Israel and Palestine. And those immigrants from those different places, and I just named 4 different countries affected by those places, are going to be seen really differently in Canada. Sometimes because of the color of the skin, sometimes because of the religion, sometimes because of the language they speak. Spend all day talking about this, but I think the leadership of newcomers is definitely there in all areas of society. The question might be which newcomers, like you just mentioned, there's different kinds of newcomers, right? And so if we're talking about the last few waves of newcomers from places like Africa or Latin America, East Asia, then there's still a lot that we don't have access to in terms of leadership, whether it's political or economical. And as I was saying before, we have sometimes a glass ceiling when it comes to developing your career in different sectors in Canada. entry and mid-level positions, and then you see less and less get into leadership positions and sitting on leadership tables in private organizations or even government or grand corporations. There are some, but we need a lot more than that. Now, if you see the other waves of immigrants from the past or from other countries that are also considered newcomers here or generations of newcomers, you're going to see those ones already participating. And it also goes with the place you are in. For example, in Manitoba, we have a long history of Filipino immigration here. And naturally, because they have been here since the 60s and 70s, the 80s, and in bigger numbers than other newcomers, you're going to see them participating at a bigger level in society and in organizations in general, politics, and so on and so forth. So I think it's a historical thing too, a generational thing. And of course, we touched on a few political aspects of why we have different kinds of newcomers.
Yeah, I am very happy that you point that out, because sometimes we don't think about that. We just think about the second wave of newcomers, I might say.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. Well, the most immediate, group that you consider to be newcomers, and that's okay, because at the end of the day, as I said before, it's the concept changes from sector to sector, even from government to government. As I said before, they can change the deadlines and they can change the requirements in the number of years of you being here to apply for something, for a service, and so a newcomer can be someone who just arrived versus someone who has been here for 10 years and still doesn't have the permanent residence.
And even if we have the permanent residence, we are newcomers. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any advice for newcomers?
Yeah, I think in the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we worked on trying to level the ground in organizations like I mentioned before. It's going to be a continuing effort. It doesn't happen from overnight, from one day to another. And so probably my biggest advice is to try harder than anybody else. We already have a lot of disadvantages, but we have to turn them into advantages. We also have a lot of things that they don't have here. So when you grow up in an underdeveloped country, you are used to work harder for things, try harder and try more times. Don't give up and that sort of thing. So, that can be reflected in many ways. So I think make use of that experience. Make sure that you don't see a lot of who you are as a disadvantage. Like having an accent means that you speak more than one language. So having an accent in front of someone who maybe doesn't have an accent but only speaks one language, you have an advantage right there. But you just need to make sure that you work a little harder on your pronunciation and that, you use that in your favor. So I think be proud of who you are and try harder than everybody else, because you're going to have to prove yourself harder. And this applies not only to newcomers. Remember, I talked about intersectionality before. So equity deserving groups in Canada, again, Indigenous peoples, women, 2S LGBTQIA+, people with mental or physical disabilities, or neurodiverse people. And so if you belong to one or more, saying, if you're a woman but you're also an immigrant, you have two aspects of who you are who might play against you in the sense of, challenges and barriers. So you have to work extra harder for that. And that applies to all newcomers, but of course to anybody who belongs to any of those groups. My advice is, understand that you're going to have to prove yourself harder and work harder than everybody else.
Thank you so much, Jaime, for this wonderful advice. Thank you for your time. And I hope you can come back soon and we can keep talking about. Thank you once again to our wonderful audience. See you next time. Bye-bye. Don't forget to follow us on social media. See you next time.